Scary telling.
I used to think my coworker's obsession with rules was a harmless quirk. I mean, who doesn't like a bit of structure in their life? But as time went on, I began to realize that it was more than just a preference. My coworker was addicted to rules. And not just any rules, they needed new rules constantly, and they would become agitated and angry if they didn't get them. At first, I found it amusing. I would listen to my coworker go on about the latest set of rules they had come up with, and I would laugh along with them. But as the weeks went by, the rules became more extreme. They began to demand that our manager create new rules for us to follow, and when he refused, they would become aggressive. It was like watching a Jekyll and Hyde transformation. My coworker would go from cheerful and friendly to angry and demanding in a matter of seconds. And it wasn't just me who noticed. Other people in the office began to avoid my coworker, and I could sense a growing fear among my colleagues. Then one day, it happened. My coworker demanded that our manager come up with new rules, and when he refused, my coworker attacked him. I was there, in the same room, and I watched in horror as my coworker became violent. They shouted and screamed, demanding that our manager create new rules or suffer the consequences. I didn't know what to do. I was frozen, watching as my coworker continued to lash out. It wasn't until our manager managed to escape that I snapped out of it. I realized then that my coworker's addiction to rules was becoming dangerous. And I wasn't the only one who thought so. As the days went by, I noticed more and more people in the office becoming fearful of my coworker. They would avoid them, and I could see the tension building. I didn't know what to do, but I knew I couldn't just sit back and watch. I had to do something. So, I started to talk to my colleagues, trying to gauge their feelings about the situation. And what I found was that everyone was afraid. We were all scared of what my coworker might do next. But we didn't know how to stop it. It wasn't until I spoke to one of my friends outside of work that I realized what we had to do. My friend suggested that we talk to a therapist about my coworker's addiction to rules. It seemed like a long shot, but we were desperate. We managed to convince my coworker to see the therapist, and at first, it seemed like it was working. They seemed to be more relaxed, less obsessed with rules. But it didn't last. They soon slipped back into their old ways, demanding new rules and becoming agitated when they didn't get them. I knew then that we were in trouble. My coworker's addiction was spreading, infecting others in the office. And I didn't know how to stop it. All I could do was watch as my coworker's obsession with rules spiraled out of control. It didn't take long for my coworker's addiction to rules to spread beyond our office. It seemed like everywhere I looked, people were becoming more obsessed with rules. And it wasn't just about following rules, they needed new ones constantly, and they would become agitated and angry if they didn't get them. The city was becoming more and more chaotic, with people fighting and arguing over rules. It was like we were all trapped in a never-ending cycle of rule-making and rule-following, and I didn't know how to escape it. Then, one day, I found myself imprisoned by the rule addicts. It was like something out of a nightmare. I was locked up in a small, damp cell with no windows, surrounded by other people who had defied the rules. At first, I was terrified. I didn't know what was going to happen to me, and I could hear the screams of other prisoners echoing through the halls. But as the days went by, I began to realize that we were all in the same boat. We were all victims of the rule addict's addiction. We tried to make the best of it. We talked and joked and tried to keep each other's spirits up. But it was hard. We were all scared, and we didn't know what was going to happen to us. Then, one day, we heard a commotion outside of our cells. It was the rule addicts, and they were coming for us. They dragged us out of our cells and lined us up in a row, staring us down with cold, dead eyes. I knew then that we were in trouble. The rule addicts had become more violent, more aggressive. They had no mercy for those who defied their rules. They asked us if we had anything to say for ourselves. I wanted to speak out, to tell them that what they were doing was wrong. But I was too scared. All I could do was stand there, trembling with fear. Then they began to torture us. They used all kinds of implements, whips, chains, knives, and they didn't hold back. I felt pain like I had never felt before, and I could hear the screams of my fellow prisoners all around me. I don't know how long it went on for. It felt like hours, but it could have been days. All I know is that I was in agony, and I wanted it to end. When they were finished with us, they threw us back in our cells. We were battered and bruised, and I could barely move. But somehow, I knew that we had to find a way to escape. We couldn't stay there forever. We had to fight back against the rule addicts and take back our city. We tried to escape from our cells, but it was no use. The rule addicts had increased security, and they were watching our every move. We were trapped, with no hope of escape. Then, one day, they came for me. They dragged me out of my cell and tied me to a post in the middle of a public square. I could see people all around me, watching as the rule addicts prepared to torture me. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to beg for mercy, to plead with them to spare me. But I knew it was no use. They had no mercy for those who defied their rules. They began to torture me, using all kinds of implements to inflict pain. I screamed and cried out, but there was no one to save me. The rule addicts were enjoying this, reveling in the power they had over another person. But I refused to give up. Even in the face of unimaginable pain, I remained defiant. I shouted out against the rule addicts, telling them that what they were doing was wrong. I don't know if anyone heard me, but it didn't matter. I knew what I had to do. When they were finished with me, they threw me back in my cell. I was battered and bruised, barely able to move. But I was alive. And that was something. I didn't know how much longer I could go on like this. Every day was a struggle, a battle to survive. But I knew that I had to keep fighting. I had to find a way to escape, to break free from the rule addict's grip. And then, one day, I saw my chance. The rule addicts had become complacent, thinking that they had us all under control. But they were wrong. I managed to slip past their guards and make my way to the outer wall. I knew that it was a risk, but I had to take it. I climbed up a wall, my fingers scrabbling for purchase on the rough stone. I made it to the top and looked down. There was a long drop to the ground below, and I hesitated for a moment. But then I saw a group of rebels waiting for me. They had come to help me escape. I took a deep breath and jumped. The fall seemed to last forever, and I felt a sickening lurch in my stomach. But then I hit the ground and felt the impact reverberate through my body. The rebels helped me to my feet, and we ran as fast as we could. We could hear the rule addicts shouting and screaming behind us, but we didn't look back. We knew that we had to keep moving, to keep fighting. And that's what we did. We joined forces with other rebels, and we began to plan our attack on the rule addicts. We knew that it wouldn't be easy, but we were determined to fight back against their tyranny. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew that I was ready to face it. I had been through hell and back, but I had survived. And now, I was ready to take on the rule addicts and free my city from their grip. We spent weeks planning our attack on the rule addicts. We scouted out their headquarters, studied their movements, and identified their weaknesses. We knew that we couldn't defeat them through brute force alone. We had to be smart about it. The day of the attack arrived, and I was nervous. I didn't know what to expect, but I knew that it was going to be dangerous. We gathered together in a secret location, armed and ready for battle. As we approached the rule addicts' headquarters, I could feel my heart racing. I could hear the sound of weapons clashing, and I knew that we were in for a fight. We charged forward, weapons at the ready. The rule addicts were caught off guard, and we managed to take them by surprise. We fought hard, pushing back against their forces and taking out as many of them as we could. But it wasn't easy. The rule addicts were powerful, and they fought with a ferocity that I had never seen before. I saw friends fall, their bodies broken and battered. I felt fear like I had never felt before, but I knew that I had to keep fighting. We pushed forward, inch by inch, until we reached the heart of the rule addicts' headquarters. And there, we faced their leader. He was a tall, imposing figure with cold, dead eyes that seemed to stare straight through me. We clashed, our weapons ringing out in the air. I could feel the force of his blows, but I refused to give up. I fought back, pushing harder and harder until finally, I managed to land a blow. He fell to the ground, and I knew that it was over. The rule addicts had been defeated. We had won. We celebrated that night, drinking and laughing and telling stories of our battles. But even as we reveled in our victory, I knew that the fight wasn't over. The addiction to rules was still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for its chance to strike again. But we were ready for it. We had proved that we could fight back against tyranny, that we could break free from the chains of addiction. And I knew that as long as we had each other, we could face anything that came our way. The battle for freedom had been won, but the war was far from over. But we were ready. We were strong. And we were free. In the aftermath of the battle, things began to change. The addiction to rules that had once held our city in its grip began to fade away. People started to think for themselves, to question the rules that had once seemed so important. It wasn't easy. Breaking free from addiction is never easy. But we did it. We worked together, supporting each other as we took the first steps towards a new way of life. I won't say that it was perfect. There were still those who clung to the old ways, who couldn't let go of their addiction to rules. But they were becoming fewer and farther between. And with each passing day, we grew stronger. I found myself in a position of leadership, helping to guide our city towards a new future. It was scary, but also exhilarating. I felt like I was finally making a difference, that I was contributing to something bigger than myself. We worked hard, building a new society based on freedom and mutual respect. We set up systems of governance that were based on cooperation and consensus rather than strict rules and punishment. It wasn't perfect. We had our disagreements and our setbacks. But we kept moving forward, one step at a time. And then, one day, I realized that I had broken free from my addiction to rules. It wasn't a sudden realization, it was more of a slow, gradual process. But looking back, I could see how far I had come. I no longer craved the thrill of new rules. I no longer felt that compulsion to always have more. Instead, I felt content with what I had. I felt fulfilled by the work that I was doing, by the relationships that I was building. And I knew that I wasn't alone. I could see it in the faces of my fellow citizens. We had all come so far, from a city held captive by addiction to a place of freedom and possibility. It wasn't easy. Breaking free from addiction never is. But we did it. We worked together, supporting each other as we took the first steps towards a new way of life. And looking back, I knew that it was all worth it. Every moment of pain, every moment of doubt, every moment of fear, it was all worth it. Because we had broken free.